Howdy folks. This video is not going to be a vlog. It's going to be a little bit different this time around. For this one, I decided instead to pivot into more of a video about expenses. I thought it would be good for me to just show what expenses are for probably, no, not even probably, definitely the most expensive show of the year for us. But I also wanted to give alternatives for stuff that we do because we live differently, we experience things differently, and we travel differently than other folks probably would. And so instead of just saying like, this is how expensive things are, I wanted to provide our expenses, ways that you can make those expenses higher if you wanted to live a little more lavishly, obviously. And then of course, ways that you can make those things a lot cheaper. But yeah, this is going to be a little different than a traditional vlog. I get to flex my motion graphics skills a little bit, so hopefully you enjoy it and learn something. And yeah, let's go ahead and kick it off. Poof, change locations for a bookshelf because we're learning today. Okay, so let's just get this out of the way. My booth for New York Comic Con cost me right around $2,300, and you're probably thinking, holy shit, that's a lot of money. And you're totally right. But let me break this down for those of you who may be new. I'm gonna generalize a bit here, but cons are usually split into two main sections, the Artist Alley section and the Exhibitor section. Artist Alley is typically meant for single artists who are looking to showcase their work, maybe a couple, but usually one artist. The Exhibitor section can also hold artists, but it really also holds everyone else. And this means anyone from like small businesses to huge, literally billion-dollar companies like Bandai and people like them. You can get a much broader range of products there, like vintage comics and trading cards are a big one, action figures, etc., t-shirts, you get it. Occasionally though, you'll get Artist Alley folks who have either like outgrown their space in the Artist Alley, or like me for this particular show who can't get into the Artist Alley because it's super competitive, but still want to be present at the show. And so Exhibitor for me was a more tenable and easier thing to get into than the Artist Alley was. Now, because of the larger space and the more, I guess, corporate nature of the Exhibitor section, it often costs quite a bit more to get in there than an Artist Alley table would, right? Now, I still think this cost is worth it, if really if only to incubate at New York Comic Con, but I mean, obviously, $2,300 is absolutely prohibitive and generally prices out a majority of folks. Now, in terms of making this cheaper, there aren't really many ways I can think of to lower this cost specifically for New York Comic Con, aside from, actually getting into Artist Alley. And Artist Alley was about $565, so obviously a significant step down. And for print artists, you'll probably end up making a lot more there too. That's why it's so competitive. As a general rule of thumb, Artist Alley is much cheaper than the Exhibitor section, and it's generally what most people want to go for when it comes to selling prints. Now, on the flip side, if you really want to go balls to the wall, you can really jack up your price pretty easily. You can like buy a corner booth, for example. You can splurge for that, which is in general like an upcharge of about 25% or so. And then once you start getting into like multiple booth spaces, you're probably not watching this video anyway, so let's be real. You're doing pretty well on your own. So I literally only sell prints, that's by design, to keep it simple. So my costs are gonna look a little different than someone else's would, for example. So total for this show, I spent $1,073 on prints, and that includes the raw cost of the printing itself, as well as the shipping and handling. I ordered 855 total prints, so like total sheets of paper, and that came out to about $823 on their own. Now there were some specialty prints in there that jacked up the price a little bit, but in general, I would say you're looking about anywhere from $1 to $1.50 per print, per 11 by 17 print, that is. The shipping cost was about $150 total. Now this usually costs around $10 actually, but I chose to ship directly to the convention center, which they obviously charge for the convenience of that. That was about $140 out of the $150. Now obviously that's very expensive, but I mean the package gets delivered right to my table within the convention center, and the alternative was to drag like 75, 85 pounds of prints through the city, which I just really wasn't gonna do. The last $100 was a little unexpected. Unfortunately, some of the design files that I uploaded to CatPrint to then print out for me, they got corrupted in the middle of uploading, and so the prints weren't like completely done, but I couldn't sell them to people. So I had to make an emergency order for that, which costs around $100 to replace the prints that were damaged. Obviously, there are lots of ways to make this more expensive, so I'll start there. I mean, if you're branching outside of prints to do things like charms, keychains, pins, etc., your overhead is probably going to be a lot more expensive in addition to the weight of just shipping and handling, right? Rush shipping and printing obviously is something that will jack up your prices too if you either forget, like sometimes I do, or if, like, say you finish a design like 3 days before a show and you really want to sell it at that show and you hit rush shipping to get it there in time, that's going to cost you more as well. Making your costs cheaper is a little bit trickier. Obviously, if you're just starting out, you won't need to buy as many prints as I do. I know when I was just starting, my print costs were anywhere from $100 to $200, which is obviously a far cry from $1,100. Okay, this is gonna be a long section, so I think I'm gonna break it into 3 categories, which is flight, hotel, and transit. A Southwest round trip from Southern California to New York City costs $473 per person. Southwest is my airline of choice because of a couple of reasons. I mean, the obvious one is the 2 free bags. And so if I'm carrying my setup with me and print, etc., it's gonna save me anywhere from $200 to $300 per show, considering the cost of 1 plus 2 bags, and then with Chelsea with me, that's extra saved. The other one is that Southwest offers its companion pass for people who have enough points, and we are fortunate enough to fly enough to get that. And so that means Chelsea gets to travel with me essentially for free anywhere I go. So that basically cuts the flight cost in half. Hotels. Hotels are far and away my biggest expense across all shows, I would say. And it's probably the category that I have the most to say about. So to start off, for staying in New York City 6 days, it cost us $2,052. We chose to stay at the Crowne Plaza in Times Square, which we really enjoyed and I would recommend. This year we wanted to stay somewhere in Manhattan, mostly for ease of getting around. Like last year, for example, we stayed in Weehawken, New Jersey, which I think total cost around $1,600, and we got an extra day out of it for 7 days total. And it was easy to get to the Con Center because there was a nice ferry that went basically right from our hotel to the Con Center, but for everything else in New York, it became a little less convenient because there were no real good subway stations around, and so we had to walk a while to get anywhere into Manhattan that we wanted to go. So it actually felt really difficult to enjoy New York City in its fullest because of that. And so this year we decided to change it up and stay a little closer, if only for a little more money. Now, obviously this is a pretty simple expense to cut down on. New York City is, it's a bad example because of local ordinances, but in most other large cities, like there are Airbnbs you can stay at. And that'll be significantly cheaper than the Hyatt or something next to the convention center or whatever. You can obviously like stay further from the convention center at a cheaper hotel and then use like public transportation or rideshare to get to the convention center. That's what I did when first starting out, and it helped me save costs a lot. And the biggest cost cutting measure I see is people that are room sharing. So I know a lot of artists will get their friends or even get acquaintances and all split the cost of a room together. And that can really cut down on hospitality costs and your hotel costs. So that's something I could recommend for folks that are just starting out as well and looking to cut down on expenses. However, I'll say this, my fiance and I are in our 30s and we're frankly quite done with having to hoof it, let alone share rooms with others. And so we very much value convenience that aids in our personal health, is the way I like to put it. So having a hotel that's right next to the convention center is obviously super convenient. It allows us to get more rest, to not break our back while carrying bags all over the place, or like taking public transit, etc. Of course, you know, we recognize that we have a really great privilege of being able to do that. But you know, since we have the means, that's where we choose to turn up our spending a little bit. It helps the constant travel be more sustainable long term. So when I think of this category, I'm mainly thinking of like driving costs, rideshare, and public transit. For New York Comic Con, we spent $275 in transit. New York City in particular is particularly egregious for rideshares because getting anywhere between LaGuardia Airport and Manhattan is around $75 to $100 one way, including tip. This is far and away the most expensive rideshare city we visit each year, with the only one that approaches it being Seattle, I would say. So this will hopefully not be as expensive in other cities. Some like larger ones, actually, funny enough, like Seattle, have, for example, a light rail system that goes from the airport to the city and back, and that can be a lot cheaper, and it's probably your cheapest option in getting from the airport to wherever you're staying. New York City has its subways and it has buses, but again, we just didn't want to drag suitcases around in the underground, especially because not all the subway stations in New York City are accessible anyways. And so carrying up and down stairs, we could actually injure ourselves doing that. So we decided to instead eat the cost and take the rideshare to the city. Now, if you wanted to go in the completely opposite direction, you could just do rideshares only, which I have seen people do. Obviously, it's a premium, right? But it is the most convenient option of them all. Or, for example, we've like splurged for a nicer ride when some of the normal ones just weren't available because it's way too busy. So I don't know. There's lots of options. So I think the main takeaway from this section is to kind of really figure out the balance of what you can afford versus what you value. Obviously, Chelsea and I have places that we elect to splurge on, like the nicer and closer hotels, and then also places that we choose to save on, like taking public transit. You, on the other hand, may choose to stay in a small room share in the city, for example, or maybe take the bus to and from the con center, which is, like I said, definitely closer to what I did when I was first starting out. But everyone has different life values, different means, etc. So I just encourage you to really figure out where you're at. Okay, brace yourself. Do you want to know how much we spent on food this trip? It was a grand total of $752, which I get it is a lot, but let me break it down so it makes just a little more sense. Including our days of travel, we have 7 days to account for 2 people, right? So that comes out to around, I want to say $55 a day per person spread across 2 or 3 meals. And in New York City, let me tell you, that is a very easy cost to hit because food costs are particularly expensive there. Everything's expensive there. It's New York City. And I'll say this too, look, Chelsea and I love food, okay? Like I mentioned before with this making this life of travel sustainable thing, we also really like to have things to look forward to, or else we'd probably go crazy, right? So a big thing that we like to do is eat really good food. And so while this is more expensive, we also generate a lot of really, really good memories, which I think is well worth the cost. But this obviously is also a super easy expense to cut down on, right? I've seen artists get food primarily from grocery stores, which is awesome. And especially if you're like staying at a place with a kitchen, like an Airbnb, for example, you could go to the grocery store and kind of cook like you were at home and just get regular groceries, make your meals, pack Tupperware with you, take it to the convention center, and eat that way. So it's pretty much the same rules for if you're eating for yourself. We just choose to allocate that money a little differently. So this last section for me is kind of a catch-all for all the other expenses that don't really fall in the neat categories. For New York Comic Con, this was $440, and it included 3 things, which were Wi-Fi, the table, and chairs. Wi-Fi was $280 for all 4 days, which is stupid expensive, and I have a lot of thoughts about this that I won't share here. But last year when I did NYCC, there were like really, really bad service issues when we first got there. And this was like on Thursday, and I had to go wait in line with like 30 other angry exhibitors for 2 hours to purchase Wi-Fi, which was more expensive at the show floor, while Chelsea manned the booth on her own. And so this time I just was not going to go through that again, even if the service was better. And so I decided to pre-purchase Wi-Fi, which was a little cheaper to pre-purchase, and it gave me peace of mind overall. Now, obviously this varies from show to show. New York Comic Con is actually the only show where I actually need to purchase Wi-Fi, just because there's like, 100,000, 150,000 people there at any given moment. So the signal is really congested. With other cons, I'm usually, like probably 90% of shows, able to get by with just regular cell service, and the remaining 10%, I have a Solus Wi-Fi hotspot that serves as a good backup. And the only other costs that I had in this category are also New York Comic Con exclusive, which is tables and chairs. New York Comic Con, to my knowledge, is like one of the only cons that don't actually provide a table and chair for you, especially in the exhibitor section. So you got to provide them yourself. You can rent a table through the convention center, which is what we did. That was about $120 because buying it was around the same cost anyways, and then I'd have to deal with getting rid of it afterwards. Yeah, that was worth the maybe $10, $20, $30 I would have saved there. But chairs, however, chairs were like $120 to rent as well each. So for 2 of us, right, to spend $240 on chairs seemed really prohibitive. So instead we bought a pair of small compactable camping chairs for like $40. And they weren't the most comfortable things in the world, but they worked and they were fine. And saving $200 there, I think, was the right play. Not much to say here on how to make this cheaper or more expensive. Unfortunately, it just kind of varies from show to show. So hopefully your miscellaneous costs aren't super high. So, with everything combined, our overhead was right around $7,323. But here's a breakdown of where all that money went. Now, obviously, a huge bulk of this was the table cost and the hotel cost, like I mentioned earlier, with the remainder going to the other sections. Our overall revenue for this show was $11,589, meaning our total profit was $4,266. I split this halfway with Chelsea, bringing my take home to $2,133. So look, is that great for my standards? No, not even close, unfortunately, especially for one of the biggest shows in the world, right? There was a lot working against me though, right? There's not a lot of people looking for art prints in the exhibitor section. And for those that are, we really don't stand out that much, frankly. My booth is more meant for an artist alley setup rather than an exhibitor setup. And so compared to some of the larger booths, even some of the other artists, but especially the booths that are like, again, multi-million-dollar companies being there, we just, we're kind of hidden. And that's my own fault. And there's a lot that I can look to improve on there. But I mean, look, we went to New York City and we had an awesome time. We got to see Dodgers versus Mets in the baseball playoffs, which was really awesome. We even got to see Ohtani hit a home run. We loved that. We got to see Hadestown with Jordan Fisher, which was awesome. We ate a ton of really, really good food, as I mentioned, and we even got to meet up with some family and some friends out there. So, maybe we just don't treat this as a strictly for-profit con, and instead we treat it more as a time to make a lot of really awesome memories in New York City. I don't know. That doesn't sound that half bad.